Okay, so screen is shared and let's get started. Okay, thank you everyone for joining. It is really great to be with you today to talk about another soft skills topic and another skills that I personally consider um, in one of the most important skills that we use either in our professional life or in our personal lives. This skills, it's communication skills. So the focus is going to be about communication skills, but we will add it a little bit of flavor to talk about storytelling and the importance of storytelling in communications. I think that when we discussed leadership, we also addressed storytelling. We did not go in depth. Hopefully, next time we can talk about storytelling in depth, where we are going to have a full session addressing storytelling and the importance of storytelling. But for now, speaking about communication, we will only have couple of points talking about storytelling. I do not want to overwhelm you guys with the storytelling and the meaning of storytelling, how we tell a story, the importance of telling a story, but rather I want to just address, you know, um, how storytelling contributes to effective communication. Um, Before to kickstart, I think that is something that I mentioned before, something I was discussing with Gillian before the presentation, and something that I want to repeat. Starting hopefully from November, these sessions will be shifting to be in person in both American Corner Tunis and American Corner Sus. Now there are many small details that we will be discussing with Gillian and Rada once I'm back to Tunisia. But the highlight, the most important information that you guys need to be aware of first is that these sessions, these trainings will be in person in Tunis and in Sousse starting from November. But also, we will expand the structure of the session a little bit. What I mean by expanding the structure of these sessions a little bit, we won't only talk about the theory, but also we will be having some case studies. We'll be having some activities where you guys can apply what you are learning, but what you learned from the theoretical presentation that I delivered in a real case studies. So these are important information that you need to be aware of, and I would be really excited to meet you in person once I'm back to Tunisia next month. So let's kickstart our presentation and dive in. The agenda, as usual, as you guys know me, I keep it short and sweet. We will talk about four main points. First of all, we'll be discussing about the four main pillars of communication. Then the three elements of powerful communication skills. What are the elements that we need to be aware of? We need to improve to reach the point of having, let's say, a good communication skills. A good communication skills, sometimes it's sufficient to be to be a good performer in your job, but also in your personal life as well, to be a good communicator, right? We're not talking about being a great communicator. We're not only talking about effective communication, but good communication for me is enough. And we will discuss the three elements that you guys need to work on so you can be a good communicator. Of course, the better you work on these elements, the better you will be in terms of communications and communication skills. Then we were going to talk about body language mastery. Body language mastery, there is many elements in communication and many key sub skills in communication that we can talk about it. But there is a reason why I want to focus on body language most importantly. There will be a whole slide about body language, and you will see later how body language can be important in communication skills. Then finally, as I mentioned, the flavor of storytelling and how storytelling can contribute to effective communication. So this is basically our agenda. Again, while going through the presentation, feel free to drop your questions in the chat box, or also you can wait till the presentation ends so you guys can unmute yourself and ask your questions. Sorry guys. So what are the four main pillars of communications? When I say the four main pillars of communication, I am talking about the things that you need to be aware of when using your communication skills, when you are communicating. Either you are communicating over texts, or you are communicating over emails, or you are communicating over voice note, or over phone, or even in person. There are four main things that you have to take into consideration, and your communication styles and skills should be adapted accordingly. These four pillars are people, the people that you are addressing, the profile that you are addressing, then the type of message that you are delivering. Third, the context, on which context, or maybe I would say it's more like, I do not want to say location because it's going to limit what I mean by context, but it's rather the environment where you are delivering your message, because the environment or the context can affect hugely the audience or the person you are communicating to, and you will see later what I mean exactly. Fourth pillar is listening, and listening itself, probably it will take us a little bit of time to approach it, because let me say this and move on, because later I will dive deeper what I mean about this. Communication is about listening. It's something that probably all of you or most of you read about it, but I repeat, communication is about listening. Now, probably most of you are nodding with their head and saying, true, communication is about listening. The problem is that we all think that we are good listeners. We all think that by simply listening to someone telling us something or delivering a message, we think that we are a good listener. However, this is not the case. And we will discuss later what I mean. I think that in previous presentations, I discussed this and I talked about this. So bear with me if I'm going to repeat a few things that I already mentioned in previous presentations. Now, what do I mean by people as a main pillar of communication? So you have to be aware whenever you are communicating either with a friend, with a family member, in a professional setting, in academical setting, you have to be aware and you have to know who is the person that you are addressing. Because by knowing who is the people that you are addressing, you have to know and be aware of your communication styles. You have to be aware of the words that you need to use. You have to be aware of the formalities of your communication styles. Sorry. So basically here, if I give you an example, the way that you communicate with your friend obviously should not be, sorry guys, I think that I did drink too much coffee this morning. So basically the way that you communicate with your friends should not be the same way you communicate with your maybe brother and sister or your father and mother. So this is something, it's pretty simple, but you have to be aware of. Let me talk about it a little bit on professional setting. So basically, when you are communicating with your boss, obviously should not be the same way you are communicating with a colleague. So your communication styles should be different, and you will see later what you need to consider exactly. Your boss, it should be more formal than a colleague. This is basically something that you were telling myself right now. This is basically something that you're probably telling yourself, that the meaning, what I mean by communicating with your boss should not be the same way you're communicating with your colleague. It's a matter of formality, because your boss is your superior. You have to be formal with him or with her. Your colleague, basically, you are on the same hierarchy. Communication can be flexible. It can be formal, it can be informal, it can be in between. But it's not just about the formality, but it's also like the use of words, how polite you should be, because sometimes when you say, for instance, you are requesting something from someone, from a colleague or from your boss. So when you request something from someone, you would probably ask them, I would kindly request this or that. I would kindly ask, or if it is possible to do this and that. This is probably with a boss. With a colleague, you probably would tell them, I want to, right? So this is an example of how you use the words. And it is about the formality, but also it's about how like professional you are, how polite you are as well. But also the other thing is that you need to consider sometimes communicating with your boss, it would be different from a boss that you had for a 5 years long, for a 5 years long timeline, from a style of communication with a boss that who recently joined. What I mean by that is that sometimes you have to be cautious. Sometimes you should not use your attitude or your own communication styles or what you have, like, because sometimes we have our own communication styles. We have a specific way to communicate, that's how we grew up doing it, that's how we learn. This is professional, also like in professional setting, this is what we learned. But sometimes you have to be cautious, because that communication style may not please everyone, may not please. If I am your boss for 5 years, so probably I got used to you, and it's okay for me to hear from you saying, I would like to have something, right? Maybe if I leave the job and you will have a new boss, the new boss probably they would want you to communicate in a different way. I completely understand if you do not know how the other boss will want you to communicate, but I want you to be as professional as possible, as formal as possible, especially when you're communicating with someone for the first time. And then with time, you have to assess that person, to assess how that person would like to be communicated to, and then adapt and adjust your communication accordingly. Now, what are the things that you need to consider in terms of adaptation of your communication style? You have to think about the think, the feel, and the do. The think is simply when you communicate, when you're communicating with someone, when you're communicating, for example, with your partner, with your wife, with your husband, with your father, with your girlfriend, with your boyfriend, with your boss, what do you want them to think? What do you want them to think? What do they want them? If I am, for example, delivering a presentation right now to you guys in a specific communication style, in my mind and before the presentation, I took note of, if I'm going to communicate this way, here is exactly how I want the attendees, what, sorry, not how, what, here is exactly what I want the attendees to think, right? And for example, if I want the attendees to be inspired by the presentation, there should be a specific communication style. There should be a specific words to be used. There should be a specific verbal communication and a body language communication. So it's the most important thing, especially as I mentioned, whenever you're addressing someone for the first time, but regardless, also people that you know or like you've been a friend with for a long time and you've been a partner with for a long time, always, you have to put in mind what do you want them to think? If I'm going to communicate to them, what do I want them, what do I want them to think? Then, what do you want them to feel? Respect is the number one feeling that you want the other person to feel when communicated to. Because if you are coming to talk to me, if I pick anyone right now, if I pick Jillian, if I pick Rada, and they come to me to talk to me, I want to feel respected. All of us want to feel respected, especially in professional setting. And this is most importantly for you as an advice, guys, when you integrate a new professional setting or a new company, when you join a new organization, you have to understand that, first of all, you want to be feeling respected, but other, like your counterpart, your colleagues, your boss wants to feel respected as well. So you have to adapt and adjust your communication styles, your use of word, your body language accordingly, so you make sure that the other person is respected. So this is the most important thing. Now, the last thing is, what do I want them to do? So if I am communicate something to someone, if I am communicating to you guys this presentation, 4 main pillars of communication, what I want you to do is that I want you later to apply what I'm telling you right now. And that's how, for example, I frame my communication styles. I even frame the content. And when I say the content, in the case of communication, how I frame the wording of my presentation, of my speech, etc., etc. Because what I want you to do, guys, is that my purpose, so there is the think, the feel, the do. I repeat, think, feel, the do. What I want you to do is that I want you to apply what I am trying to say in this presentation. And that's how I framed my content, and I framed my speech, and I am using my words. For example, one of the solid ways that I am, one of the solid, or one of the things that I'm using, so you can, guys, be inspired and apply what I'm telling you right now in terms of communication, is storytelling. So that's why I added a component of storytelling later. So this is the most important thing. And to sum up this, it's pretty simple. It is as simple as that. To understand or to know, if you see someone, for example, and you find it difficult to communicate with a person, or you find it's just like you don't know the person, so you are scared, or you don't know the person, so you don't know what you say, and you just like taking one step back and telling yourself that I don't know that person, probably he or she will be upset if I say this. It's as simple as that. Always do your best to understand your message from other people's perspective. So put yourself in other person's shoes. If I'm going to communicate this specific things that I have in mind to the person, if I was that person, if I was him or her, how do I want this message to be delivered to me? So always put this in mind. So the number one main pillar of communication, people. So your way of delivering your message, your communication styles should be adjusted based on the profile that you're addressing, but you also should to consider, what do you want them to think, what do you want them to feel, and what do you want them to do. Pillar number 2 is the message. So the pillar number 2 of communication is delivering your message. How are you gonna deliver that message? So we're talking about the people, what you want the other people to feel, to think, to do. Now we're talking about yourself, about the person who is delivering the message, okay? We are talking about the person that you're delivering your message. The message is, how are you gonna deliver that message? First of all, you have to pay careful attention, and you have to focus 100% to the words you speak and write. There are words, and this is the problem number 1, is that, you know, guys, and I think that everyone, we all have this in our, like, we all go through this, and we all have this habit, is that we all have specific words that we often use in our daily life. And when you use those words in your daily life, As I mentioned, it becomes kind of like a habit. When it becomes a kind of habit, even in your professional life, you may even by mistake use those words. So for instance, if you are the kind of person that instead of saying I want, for instance, I'm giving an example, I want to use the bathroom, so you would say I wanna use the bathroom, or I, what's another example? So let's stick to this one. If you say, for example, if instead of saying I want to use the bathroom, you would say I want to use the bathroom. So both sentences are correct. They're not wrong. But for formality purpose, it's always better, especially for someone that in professional setting that you are meeting for the first time, and especially when it comes to use of formal communication channels like email, it's better to use the formal version, which is I want to rather than I wanna. So when you in your daily life, it is fine to use with your friends, with your family, I wanna, even with your colleague, I wanna, even with your boss, it's fine when communicating verbally, of course. But with someone, for instance, a new boss or a new CEO, as I mentioned, you have to be as formal as possible. So you always use the formal part. And then it's fine with time. There is some sort of, like you will get used to each other. With time, you can later use the I wanna. And this is, as I mentioned, this is an example. There is a plenty of other example that I can mention, but also you guys know that there is a plenty of other words and vocab that you use in your daily life that probably you should avoid in your professional life, or even, or not necessarily you should avoid in professional life. You can keep in your professional life, but you should avoid when you meet someone for the first time, because it's all evolving around the first impression. So this is the most important thing that you have to be aware of, which is pay careful attention and focus on the words that you speak and write. Then you have to pay attention to non-verbal messaging. The non-verbal messaging is basically your body language and your voice. The body language and the voice, we will also discuss them later. It is really important that you guys pay careful attention to your body language. There is a body language that is a little bit offensive. There is a body language that is professional. A body language, it's a whole session for itself that hopefully we will address it. But for you, you can read books about body language. You can watch YouTube channels about body language. There is a specific way to use body language and to deliver a professional message. Matter of fact, with your body language only, you can deliver a message. Matter of fact, sometimes what you're saying is not clear, or I don't want to say not concise, but it's rather not clear, not a solid argument. But with your body language, you can shape that message that you are delivering. You can have you can let people, because people when they looking at you and they're looking at communication style, they do not necessarily only focus on the message that you're delivering, but sometimes also they focus on your body language, the way that you are standing, the way that you're moving around in the room, the way that you also using your hands. All of these are some things that can catch people attentions and audience attentions. So even if the message that you are delivering may not be as clear as the audience wants, but the body language use can be a boost to the messaging that you are delivering. Voice as well, and we will discuss it later. When I say voice, I mean the tone, when to go up, when to go down, when to pause, when to breathe, to take your time. This also displays some confidence. This is something that we will discuss later. If you lack energy and enthusiasm, you lose the attention of others. You have to understand that there are two types of communicators. There are the charismatic communicators, and there is the non-charismatic communicators. When we say charismatic, it's a matter of energy and enthusiasm, the way that you are delivering your message. Because if you are not delivering your message in an enthusiastic way, why would you want other to be enthusiastic about the message that they are receiving? So you have to always be enthusiastic, you have to always be charismatic, you have to always believe to what you're saying, and you have always to engage with your body, with your body language, with your every single fiber of your beings in the message that you're delivering, especially if you're delivering a message in professional set. And if you're communicating in a professional set, right? And this is one of the examples I think that I mentioned before during the presentation or during the training about interviews, is that whenever you're doing an interview, it's about communication, obviously, right? So whenever you do an interview, you have to be as enthusiastic as possible and as charismatic as possible, because this is what the recruiters, for instance, want. But we are not only here talking about the recruiters. Me as your boss, I want to see the enthusiasm in your communication styles. I want to see the enthusiasm in your message. But also me as a friend, as a family member, as a partner, I want to see how enthusiastic you are. Because if you are not enthusiastic, if you have a low energy level, you will lose my attention for sure, and you will lose the attention of everyone. And I'll give you an example. If you ever guys attended a PFO, like a final study project in university or a PhD, you will find a lot of people, for example, they're writing a lot of text in their slides, right? And then they start reading all these slides. And as I mentioned before in the previous presentation, when I talked about presentation skills, when you start reading from the presentation, sometimes it's difficult for you to focus on your body language, to focus on yourself, but rather you focus on what you are reading. Your brain can only focus on what you're reading. When you're focusing on your reading, you can no longer be enthusiastic. You cannot no longer display a powerful body language, because charisma and enthusiasm also evolves around body language. So this is really important. This is probably something that you guys witnessed when you attended one of these presentations, is that sometimes you see someone that who only the content of his or her presentation is only figures and graphs, and then they focus on analyzing the graphs, and they're using their body languages, and they're using good communication skills, the good wording and the charisma, and you feel that they're controlling the room. These are the sort of people that they grab your attention. But when you see someone that all what he or she's doing is reading from the slide, there is no charisma, there is no enthusiasm, there is no body language, you're probably one of the person that would like to leave the room now. So this is really important. Choose your communication channel. So choosing the communication channel, it's also similar to what I mentioned previously in terms of context. Not all messages, for instance, should be sent over voice note or over text or over email. Sometimes you have to have the communication, or to communicate some information in person. For instance, if you want to lay off staff, so layoff is basically if you want to fire staff. So there is a specific communication style that you have to use, right? There is a way to communicate the information, right? So the question is, how are you going to do this? You have two options. You can do a phone call, and you communicate this. You can send a text. You can send an email, but also you can do it in person. Now, the question for you is, which one would be best? I think that, and this is my personal view, and I'll tell you exactly why, guys. The best is to have that message delivered and communicated in person. Because when you deliver it in person, also there is emotions involved. Again, we will discuss this later. There is emotions involved, because laying off someone, it is not, it impacts heavily the person who is going to be fired. But when you share it in person, obviously you display some emotions, and obviously you display some support, which you cannot display when you are sending a message or making phone calls. Because emotions and support is a matter of also a body language as well. So it's really important to know how important the message that you want to communicate, and based on the importance of the message, you can use voice note, text, and in-person message as well. For instance, say that you are working in a company or an organization. If you are the boss, and if you want to tell someone about um, something that happened in a meeting, that it's not really important, that but it might affect the progress of work, right? That I would definitely say it is fine to do it over email or over Teams message, or over, I don't know, like a Skype message, right? But if you attend a meeting and you find out that there is a crisis that is going to hit the company, obviously you cannot just send an email over this, but you have to meet or to communicate this to your boss or to your colleague in person. So know the context, as I mentioned previously, to the message that you want to deliver, and then you can use whatever communication styles you have, either using the voice note, text, in person, based on the importance of the message that you want to deliver. Context here, what I mean by context, this might be tough to explain, but I'll make it as simple as possible. For instance, when I say context, if I want to, if for example, I am your, if you are basically working in a company, right, or in an organization, and then your boss tell you, your boss would tell you, can you come to my office to talk? So you would definitely be worrying a little bit, which might be like a little bit different if your boss, for instance, would come to your office to deliver to you a specific message. So this is what I mean by the context. It's more like the environment where you are going to deliver a message. If, for example, I tell you, listen, can we chat about something over coffee? I don't think that I will chat to you over coffee about laying you off, right? So again, let me take the example of laying off someone or firing someone. If you're gonna do that, if you're gonna do that, would it be best to also choose the context or the environment where you are going to deliver the message? You might ask the person to meet in the meeting room, maybe to tell the person, or to go to the office of the person, or to have some privacy in your meeting in your office. So based on the context again and the importance of the message, previously we talked in the previous slide about like the channel of communication. Here we're talking about more the context and the environment, right? So this is really important. For instance, you see that all these people asking, like proposing for their partners, they take them in the Maldives, they take them, like, to, I don't know, like yacht tour or cruise, etc., like all of these crazy places, because the context, it might affect the response to your message. So it's important to know what type of message you want to deliver, what type of response you want to have, what type of emotions there will be involved, and then to make sure that you choose the context accordingly. It can be over dinner, it can be over coffee chat, it can be like the gym, it can be anywhere, but choose accordingly your context and your environment based on, sorry, based on the importance of the message, the emotions that will be involved, etc. So this is what I mean by context. Guys, if anything is not clear about the pillars, I'm taking my time to explain these because they are important. Drop a message in the chat box and we will discuss it later. Now, talking about the four main pillars of the communication, or the last pillar of the communication. I mentioned previously, and I'm going to mention it again. I am going to stress on it again and again and again. Communication is about listening. Communication, before talking about the body language, before talking about your use of words, before talking about the context, before talking about anything, listening comes first. I know that here I'm putting it the last, but I want you to always know that listening is the, when you, let me give you an example. When you are in a job interview, and this is, remember it forever, guys. If they ask you about like your communication skills, the first word that I want to hear out of your mouth, it's listening, because communication evolves about listening, around listening. How are you a good communicator? A good communicator is not about someone who's efficient at using words. A good communicator is not about someone who's efficient at using arguments. A good and you can ask debaters. There are people who are great at debating. You can ask them about this, right? Again, good debaters. Not talking about like debaters in general, but good debaters. It's about listening. And when I say listening here, I do not want you to listen to answer. Again, focus on what I'm saying. I do not want you to listen to answer. I want you to listen to understand the message. Listening, it is not about you, but it is about understanding the other person message. What do they want them? What message are they telling you? What do they mean by the message that they are transmitting? So listening, it's the most important part of a conversation. And again, listening, it's not about you answering, but it's about you understanding. After understanding, you can put together your answer. The problem with us, I think with all of us, even me, and even the finest communicator, by the way, is that whenever we hear someone talking about something, we already have the answers. I assure you, like now, this, all the attendees, whenever someone is talking to you about something, 90% of the cases, you have an answer in your mind already formulated and ready to go. This is for sure. Because sometimes when we talk with someone about specific topic, let's say sports, let's say politics, let's say crisis, let's say wars, etc., most of the time, as an adult, we have our opinion about these things. When we have our opinion about these things, when we listen to someone talking to us about that specific thing, automatically our mind will start formulating an answer based on what we know about the topic, rather about what the person wants to transmit. And I'm not going to tell you that it's easy to listen to understand. It is not, and it takes a lot of practice. But here is one way that you can practice this, and it's easy to do. Whenever you listen to someone, take your time before answering. Whenever you listen to someone, do some analysis and take your time before answering, especially if the person who's delivering the message or communicating to you is giving you time to answer. For example, if you are in a meeting and then your boss communicates something to you, right? About something. Sorry, guys, if I'm mentioning a lot professional examples, because again, like my main interest always in delivering these soft skills presentation, it's for your professional growth, right? But even in your personal life, you can use these, right? Like even in your partner, for instance, if the partner or your friend or your brother is communicating something specific to you, especially when it's a serious and important topic, whenever you listen to the message to the person or the communication to the person from that person, just try to take your time. It's fine to ask for the person to take a little bit of time to answer a specific request, or if you guys, like for instance, if you are fighting about something, etc., it's fine to take your time, change the topic, and ask them, that probably you will address this issue another time, right? Especially as I mentioned, important topics. I'm not talking here about like day-to-day conversations. So always listen to understand the message, because it's something, for instance, that I personally learned. Whenever, for instance, I receive an email, because emails feel like a communication style, right? Whenever I receive an email, the email, it might be upsetting me for a specific reason. I know it's not listening, but it's the same concept. I do not, and it does, like if you receive an email, if I receive an email that pisses me off or it upsets me for delays or for something that, like walks on my nerve, let me say this, I do not answer right away. I take maybe 24 hours. I take my time. I breathe. I do other stuff. When I cool off, that's when I start thinking and I start trying to understand what are the messages between the lines. So this is important for you guys. Avoid to listen to provide an answer. Make sure to listen to understand. And then once you understand what they are trying to communicate to you, that's when you guys provide the finest answer possible based on what you know and based on what you understand as well. I hope that the listening was clear. Um, Happy to hear your questions later about listening. Now, what are the three elements of a powerful communication skills? It's pretty simple. There are three main elements. There are the vocal, the visual, and the verbal. These are the three powerful communication elements that you need to build to be a good communicator. Putting aside the listening skills. So listening is basically about receiving the message, analyzing the message, understanding the message. Once you understand the message, what is going to play in your communication skills are these three elements: the vocal, visual, the verbal. The vocal is basically your tone sends a message. So the tone of your voice definitely sends a message. And we all know sometimes, someone is yelling, sometimes it's lack of confidence when someone is yelling, sometimes it's someone is upset, etc., etc. So the tone of voice, you have to know how to control it. It's always about a balance in the tone of voice, but also when you are trying to transmit an important message, you have to have a little bit of higher tone of voice, but also try to pose. So what I mean by pose is that whenever I am communicating, there are specific important messages that I want to deliver. When you deliver those specific important messages, whenever you say that specific important message, for example, if I am leaving a job, what I would say is that I meet my boss and I will tell them, after careful consideration, I think that it's time for me to leave the position or to leave this job or to leave the company. And then you pose. Because posing will give people time to assimilate the message, understand the message, and to reflect. Because if, for instance, tell my boss, I think that it's time for me, after consideration, to leave the job because I found a better job and things did not work well and the salary was low and etc. etc. Here, look at how many messages I transmitted without giving space to my boss to reflect for a couple of seconds. So I'm leaving the job. I found a better job. The salary is not good, etc., etc. Three messages, three key messages that I want to transmit to my boss that I said them like, back to back, which is not exactly what I wanted. I wanted them to, first of all, receive the message, reflect, and probably they will answer why. And then you can dive deeper into the reasons, right? So whenever, and this is an example, but also even in your personal life, whenever you're transmitting an important message, guys, try to control the tone that you are using to deliver the message and pose. Once you pose, let the person who received the message reflect 1 or 2 seconds, right? We do not want that gap of emptiness of 15 seconds. Nobody is saying anything, no, because you are the one who's communicating. So you are controlling the conversation. So you deliver the important message, you pause, and then you continue. It's exactly the way I'm doing it right now in the presentation. You see that each time I'm delivering something, I am pausing and I am moving on. It is how I'm using it right now. It's how I used in previous presentations as well. But you see also in other occasions, sometimes I say words back to back and I just move on. Because for me, these are information probably still they are relevant, but it's not that important for you guys to remember. This is vocal, number one. Visual. Communicate through your body language. Visual, I'm not talking about presentations here, but I'm talking about if I'm communicating with you or if you are communicating with me, what am I seeing? What are you seeing? So when I say visual, I mean you have to communicate your body language. You have to communicate with your body language, you have to communicate with your face, you have to communicate with your movement, you have to communicate with your eyes. And here I put it, listen with your eyes. Guys, your eyes and eye contact can tell a lot about whether or not people are paying attention to you or not. You see? Let me give you an example. Sometimes, and this has happened to me many times, is that when I was in high school or when I was in university, sometimes a teacher is teaching on delivering like a class, and then he or she sees one of the students looking at them, but then they kind of like tell them why you're not focusing with them, because sometimes when you see someone looking at you, you would figure out whether that person is focusing or whether that person is just like thinking about something else. We all know this. This happened to us, to happen to us, and we did it also. Whether in a classroom, sometimes we look at, like at the board and then we're thinking about something else, or even with someone who is communicating with us, we just look at them and we think about something else. Probably we're thinking about the answer, which is not ideal because as I mentioned, you have to understand. You should not be thinking whenever someone who's talking to you and communicating to you a message, you should um, not think about the answer, but wait for them to finish, understand the message, and then answer. So you have to always listen with your eyes. Be careful and looking at the person who's delivering the message and listen with your eyes. Remove distraction and avoid interruption. So whenever you're communicating with someone, especially in an important setting, either with your family, with your partner, or at work, just make sure to leave your laptop outside, make sure to leave your phone outside, make sure to leave any distraction whatsoever outside. So this is what I mean by remove distraction and avoid interruption. Verbal is the words that you are saying, and here I'm talking about clarity is king. Clarity is king. You have to make sure that your message is clear, the words are clear, short and sweet. Sometimes a message of 2-3 words turns into a paragraph, which is not ideal, which is not ideal. What I mean is that sometimes you want to tell something to someone that can be told in one or two words or one phrase, and then you just say your message, and then maybe out of panic and out of stress, you just, like dig deeper into the details of the message. You don't need to dig deeper into the detail of the message. Say your message, and that's it. If people are interested, they would ask you a question, and then you will dive deep into what they want, what clarification they want. Master the use of words. There are words that you can use, and this is something that, of course, you learn through reading books, through maybe watching some YouTube videos, etc., etc. Mastering the use of words is really important. There are words that you need to know when to say. There are words that you need to know when not to say. There are words that you need to know, like in which context you say, etc., etc. And stay on target. Stay on target. It's, of course, like you have specific topic that you want to discuss, or the specific message you want to address. Stay on target, right? You don't need to go like from one topic to another, and even in the topic that you want to address, sometimes like you give hints to other topics. No, just, which is also related to clarity, right? So you have specific message that you want to transmit, a specific topic, be clear, short and sweet, know how to use the words, and that's it. I do not personally like someone who's gonna keep talking and talking and talking, because if you keep talking and if you keep, because sometimes, and probably all of us, we know people that they like to talk a lot. They like one message, like one short message of, for example, instead of saying I am traveling tomorrow, they would tell you like I'm traveling tomorrow, and then they will keep telling you a lot of different details that probably is not relevant to what you want to know. So be concise, be clear, short and sweet, and master the use of words and stay on target. Okay, body language. Three main important elements in the body language. Use eye contact effectively while communicating. Here, what I mean by use eye contact effectively while communicating, especially if you are working remotely, if you have a meeting in person, if you have a meeting over Teams or over Zoom, try your best to always look at the camera. I know that I'm not effective at doing this, but I always, whenever I have a meeting, I do not necessarily spend all the time like now looking at the camera, but from time to time, I just like look at the camera, right? The problem is that most of us, probably you guys experience that whenever we have a call, we try to look at ourselves in the screen. Try to avoid this. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but like try to avoid it and try from time to time to look at the camera. This is it's a good habit that it will be great that you build. I know that it can be like some sort of distraction because looking at the camera sometimes it makes people a little bit uncomfortable, but you don't need to spend all the time looking at the camera. Sometimes, like, look at the slides, you can look at itself, but most of the time you look at the camera. Whenever you have in-person meeting, you have to make sure don't scan. So whenever you're looking at someone, whenever you're having an eye contact, I know a lot of people, for example, when I talk to them, I start scanning. They start scanning my shoulders, they start scanning like, my t-shirts or my shirt, etc., etc. Try to avoid this. Try to avoid scanning the face because it's easy to scan the face than scanning, like your shoulder or your body or whatever. But you guys try to focus just on the eyes. There is the famous theory of the triangle, the nose, and then you have the two eyes. Try to focus on those. But it's always better to focus on the eyes. But also try to avoid not to spend like the whole meeting looking at like focusing on the eyes. There is some reflection that sometimes I do is that when I'm talking to someone, I look at their eyes, but then I look for 1 or 2 seconds away, which is fine. 1 or 2 seconds away, it's fine. It's not, but like not 5 or 6 or 7 seconds, guys, right? Because you want people to know that you are paying attention to them. Yeah, and this is what I mean, but don't look for too long, but also don't look elsewhere. What I mean by do not look for too long and elsewhere, it's true, like you have to keep eye contact, but then, deviate for 1 or 2 seconds, it's fine. It's not a problem. If there is a board that you have to look at it, if there is something else, but do not go beyond 2 or 3 seconds. Don't look too quickly, and this is most importantly when you are delivering presentation with the audience. Is sometimes I see people when they're delivering the presentation, they have the audience and they would like moving quickly with their eye contact with all the audience, right? Which is not ideal because sometimes you have an idea, you have a thought, try to look at what person, and then when you look at that specific person, try to deliver that idea and then shift to another person and then another person and then another person. So the way how you need to subdivide your eye contact in an audience, it's basically through what idea that you are delivering, or maybe 2 or 3 sentences, right? You look at someone in the audience, deliver 1 or 2 or 3 sentences. Again, also it can be like a whole idea, but the whole idea should not take like 5 minutes. It should be quick, and then shift to other person, and then the other, and then the other. But do not like quickly just scan the room all the time like a video surveillance camera. Please do not that. So eye contact, as I mentioned, this is the important part. Talk with your hands to show confidence. Using hands shows confidence. This is something that you need to understand. I do not want to see someone who's talking to me putting their hands in their pockets. With your friends, maybe it's fine, but in a professional setting, in a formal setting, in a presentation, for instance, I would like you to use your hand as much as possible. Remember, guys, I discussed before a box that goes from shoulder to shoulder to the belly button. That's the space where you can use your hands. So this is how you can use your hands, and there is multiple ways and multiple gestures that you can use. And I highly recommend that you guys look into YouTube. And YouTube, there is a plenty of courses that shows you how to use the body language. And hopefully, when I come back to Tunisia, we can discuss and we can have a whole session about the use of body language because it needs some practice, which hopefully in the session that we will organize when I'm back, we will definitely have some practice on the use of body language. But body language, it's a key component on the use of on your communication because also it displays confidence. Move with purpose and impact while communicating. So what I mean by moving with purpose and impact with communicating in the body language is, sorry, just to be specific here, when I say like the use of body language display confidence is the use of hands specifically, right? So this is the most important thing, because this is what people are going to focus on. Like maybe even more than 50% people will focus on the use of your hands, because the use of hands is more than 80% of the body language. So this is what I mean. It's specifically the hands. I'm not just talking about the body language in general. The move with purpose and impact while communicating. So obviously, when you are in a room, you do not want to be standing in the same place. So this is really important. So try to move in the room, but also do not move in the room like you are in the kitchen of your house. Move in the room with a purpose. For example, if I am in the room, if I am in a workshop, I am in the room, and then maybe Amal asks me a question, and Amal is sitting in the other side of the room, let's say in the left side of the room. So if she asks a question and you have to answer her, the way that you have to move in the room, obviously you have to turn to her, you have to take one or two steps only closer, and then deliver your answer or deliver your message. Once the message is delivered, try to slowly walk back to where you were standing at the beginning, or to the zone where you are standing. There is a zone that is, you always have to have, like, this is the main area where you should stand, which is, take the middle point. You have like one or two steps on the right and one or two steps on the left. Always right and left, not front and back. Always right and left. You have the middle point, and then two steps on the right, two steps on the left. These are the main area that you need to use. And then if someone asks a question and someone who's sitting from different angle from where you are standing, you can take like one or two steps walk toward that person to answer, right? So this is basically allows you to control the room with your movement and with the steps that you have. Always, of course, slow movement, right? And also make sure that your movements are synchronized with the use of hands and with the body language and with the messages as well. Again, the body language mastery, it's a whole topic that hopefully when I come back, I am going to have a whole theme about it. It's going to be a 1 month theme that where we are going to be talking about body language, and we will be discussing how you can use the body language, either the eye contact, also the use of hands, but also the movement in the like in the stage, or the movement in the room, etc., etc. Now, the last slide is the importance of storytelling in effective communications. I'm going to highlight 4 simple things, because storytelling is basically not a session by itself, but a theme by itself. Storytelling is what make leaders successful. So and it is something that is in the rise. I mean, a few years ago we wouldn't have heard about storytelling, but this is something in the rise, and this is something that is starting to be considered as a skill that, sorry, it's a skill that is making the difference. So when I'm talking about the storytelling and effective communications, it's about telling a story, right? Obviously. But telling a story, guys, you have to always make sure that you have a relevant story to tell. And the story that you need to tell, make sure most of the time it's about yourself, it's about an experience that you had, right? When you were a child, with your father, with your parents, etc., etc. But you still can tell other stories that are relevant. Depends on the context. That, for example, if you have someone, if you have one of your friends that who was just kicked out from their job, right, and you want to comfort them, right, and you have a really interesting story that you know about, like acquaintances or relative or someone that not necessarily from your relative, that they that they were fired from their job and they become so successful afterward because they learned from their lessons, etc., etc. You can share that story with them. So this is what I mean by storytelling. So you have to find a relevant story that align with the message that you want to deliver, that aligns with also like the emotions, the emotions in the room, the emotions involved in the message, etc., etc. So always try to have a relevant story to tell based on the context. Now, the storytelling allows us four main things. First of all, it allows us human connections. Storytelling, it gives you the ability to evoke emotions and create a sense of connection between the storyteller and the audience. So this is how you can grab people's attention emotionally, most importantly, by telling them a story, right? And for example, guys, if I tell you about leadership, right? And I tell you about leadership, how it's important. If I tell you leadership, how it is something that can make a difference, how you need to learn leadership in your high school or maybe on a university, on your personal life, etc., etc. That for you, it's really interesting, right? This is amazing. This is interesting. This motivates you, etc., etc. But imagine that telling you this, I later tell you a story about someone who actually did good job learning their leadership through examples from high school, how they did university, in their personal life, etc., 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 etc. And then they became great leaders. They became president of a country, the country progressed, etc., etc. That would gives you some sort of human connection and emotions, and it will inspire you better. So this is what I mean by storytelling can make some sort of human connection, and it also like establish a deeper bond. Let me also tell you that when I say human connection, it's also a matter about if you tell a story about yourself. So if I want you to connect with me, guys, I would tell you a story about myself, how I became a great communicator through storytelling. And if I tell you a really interesting story about how I became a good communication through storytelling, we will probably have that deeper bond together, and you will probably be more keen to develop your storytelling technique. The other thing is it creates memorable communication. So we all are bored when we see facts, data, figures, etc., etc. When we see all these in a presentation or like if you see, for example, let me give you an example. In a few days, Apple will be releasing their new iPhones, right? If you see, and most probably this is will be available online to see it live. And I promise you guys, if you watch this, you will see that whoever is going to deliver this, they will be delivering, putting like facts, data, figures, etc., etc. But you will see also, and like they will definitely share some sort of story about like about something that is inspiring, right? Because they want their communication to be memorable. They want the audience to remember their communication. They want the audience to remember what they're communicating. Matter of fact, all the facts and the data and the figures, even if they are too much, even that you will not remember anything, if I tell you a story, it will capture your attention. And that way you will still remember all these figures and all these data and all the facts. And you will still remember what's the message that I want to deliver from these facts, data, and figures. So this is what I mean by storytelling will make sure that the communication is memorable. Simplifying complexity, of course, sometimes when there are in specific contexts, specific things or specific ideas that we want to communicate, and they are complex, right? To make it less complex, to make it more simplified, it is better if we tell the stories. So stories always make things better and easy to understand. And I think that we all grew up, listening to some stories, or maybe, even, I don't know, for example, let me give you an example. If, and this has happened to me in high school, I was not the greatest when it comes to math. But then one day or one semester, actually 1 year, I studied with a professor who was really brilliant in terms of communicating the mathematical equation. Because whenever there is a mathematical equation that is complex, to make sure that we remember that that equation, that mathematical equation, they would tell us a funny story about it. They will us a funny story about like an anecdote that happened with the students, etc., etc. In that way, it allows us that we remember the communication, and here we're talking about memorable communication, but also it tries to simplify complexity, because I know that there is no way as a normal human being, at least I'm talking about myself, to remember complex equations. But for him to simplify memorizing the complexity of the equation, they would make sure to share an anecdote or a funny story about that complex equation for us to remember later on. Inspiring action, of course. And this is you see in politicians, and now we are going to have a huge batch of elections happening either in the US, in Tunisia, or in any other countries. You will see politicians, whenever they delivering speech, they tell you a story. Why would they tell you a story? Is simply to inspire, to motivate, to persuade. In any elections whatsoever, you never see a politician that did not share a story. And the reason behind this is to inspire the audience. So it should be the same for you as well, specifically when you are delivering a presentation to audience, or even when delivering a presentation to, I cannot say a final project study because I know these are like complex setting and you cannot share stories. But whenever you're delivering, whenever you have time in your presentation, that's for sure. But also whenever you're delivering, for example, presentation to donors, or a presentation to your boss, or a presentation to a recruiter, or a presentation to trainees, sorry, you can share stories to inspire, to make things less complex, to have them remember your communication, but also to make that human connection bond. That's it for communication and storytelling. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys find my presentation insightful and you learned from this. I know that these are just theoretical and top level. Again, also previous presentations, they were top level, and I would say like light touch presentation where we discussed the theory more the practice. Again, once I'm back to Tunisia, once we have these sessions in person, it will be almost 2 hours training session where we are going to have case study and practice, where you will be practicing your storytelling skills, your body language skills, your communication skills with real life case study. So if you have any questions, please guys, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. Otherwise, I'm gonna check the chat box and see if there are any, wow, we have 16 attendees. I'm gonna check the chat box and see if there are any questions. Oh, Najla, Meliki, is your voice is not very clear. Wait, was the voice not clear the whole presentation? Okay, let's do it differently, guys, from now on. Whenever there is an issue, either with my voice, not just for 5 minutes. Okay, please feel free to unmute yourself and tell me if there is anyone, because I think that for the rest of the attendees, it was clear. But whenever someone is having difficulties, please, guys, unmute yourself and tell me, right? Because when I'm displaying the presentation, I cannot see the messages. So if it was not clear, sorry for this. And yeah, I'm happy to clarify if there was something missing in my communication, or something that a section that I did not hear well. This is for Najla and also for LM. Any book recommendation, Malik? How to practice storytelling in our daily lives? Oof, book recommendations. To be honest, I cannot. I can't remember right now. I think that there are a few books, but I cannot remember the exact name. To be honest, I can share it with you, Najla, at a later stage. If you send me an email, I can send you a long list, because I have them on noted on my notebook. I have, like, list of like leadership, problem solving, communications, etc., etc. But I do not recall them. I have an issue on memorizing the name of the books. That's not good. But yeah, send me an email or approach me on social media, and I can share with you a long list of books that hopefully you can find in Tunisia, because I know that in Tunisia it's a little bit tricky to find specific books. But I trust that you would find one or two. How to practice storytelling in our daily lives? Actually, like in daily lives, we practice storytelling all the time, right? Like, are we telling stories to our friends all the time? Yes, we do. Are we telling stories like, to colleagues all the time? Yes, we do. Now, the problem is with our storytellings in our daily lives is that it's not contextualized. What I mean is that we just tell a story to tell a story, right? Storytelling, it's about inspiring. It's about making a human connection, right? So whenever you try to tell a story, whatever is the the context, like even if you are talking to your friend, even like if you are having fun, etc., etc., just make sure that you guys in your back thoughts you have a story that you want to share, but ask yourself, why am I going to share this story in this context, right? Like again, like even if you're joking with your friends or you're like having a dinner, having a lunch with your family, etc., etc., before starting to tell the story, have tell yourself, okay, what do I want from this story? Do I want them to inspire? Do I want them to be inspired? Do I want to show my communication skills? It's fine to show your communication skills or your storytelling skills, right? Do I want to make a human bond? Do I want to make the message that I want to deliver less complex? So this is something important. And for me, for example, especially when I want to deliver a message to my friend that is complex to understand. And let me give you an example. So I work in the humanitarian and development sector, right? And I work in a department that is called a transformation department. Now, if I tell people that I work in the transformation department, it is difficult for them to understand. If I tell my family that I work in transformation department, probably you guys would be like, what is this, right? But if I tell you a story about how we made a transformation possible, either within the organization or within like how can I say it? Like vulnerable population in conflict affected countries, that would help you to understand what I'm doing. And this is something that I think that I know that in Tunisia we have some jobs that if you tell your father what's the job, they would tell you, what is this, right? Or your friends, what is this? What are you doing, right? For example, I have some friends that if you tell them you are um, like you do coding in your job, right? They would tell you what is exactly coding, right? And then you need to explain probably by story about like coding, the importance of coding, how the coding started, and how is the coding is beneficial, but a story, but with a story, because you can just highlight these important things, but you can tell them a story how things started and where it went exactly. I mean, I have no clue how the coding started myself, right? But you can look for this story, and then you can just look when someone tells you what is coding exactly, what are you doing, this is something like silly, and that way it will be memorable for them. When and how can we use the technique of storytelling with teaching? Oh, Durra, when and how can we use the technique of storytelling when teaching? Every time, like in every single thing that you are probably teaching. I'm not sure if you can share with me what you are teaching exactly. Maybe I can tell you. For example, as I mentioned previously, probably it can be relevant is that, as I said, I studied math. Math for me was complicated, but one approach that the professor they do is that they tell us like an anecdote about some specific mathematical equations. Whenever they tell us an anecdote about specific mathematical equations, obviously by remember the anecdote because it's funny, right? We always remember funny things. Because it's funny, we always remember the anecdote, but also we remember why the anecdote came and why the anecdote was told. So automatically I'd remember the mathematical equation, right? So this is one way that you can use. I'm not sure what's the technique, what are you teaching exactly, but I would highly recommend if you guys, especially when you are teaching, to use inspiring stories and to use funny stories, because these are two things that human mind remembers all the time. And use it, please, when you find that there will be something complicated for people to understand or for students to understand. This is my recommendation. And I also recommend that you take your time sometimes to um, write down some stories that you think that they will be relevant for your job or for the teaching. Because the issue is that we always think that we have stories and we know stories, but we actually don't really remember. I know that all of us, we have like some interesting stories to share. All of us are great storytellers, but we do not remember the stories. Why? Because um, maybe it would be, maybe we never thought that we are going to use a story. But if you try, for example, something interesting happened to you today, if you try to write it down and keep it, maybe you can use a notebook. You know, there is a famous speaker. Um, it's on Instagram. I recently came across on Instagram. I think that he has like more than 2 million followers. I cannot really remember the name, but when they asked him about how come that he's a great storyteller, he told them that whenever a story happened, I take note of that story on the book. I do not keep it in my mind. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are. Do not keep the stories in your mind. Take note, leave a notebook, a small notebook with stories that can be beneficial, especially in specific jobs, for example, teaching, because I personally believe that teaching storytelling can be really inspiring and help people to learn. So can be beneficial for you, Dora. Have you ever used storytelling along with visual aids accompanying the story, and what was the effect? What do you mean? What do you mean by visual aids? Because the visual aid that I mentioned, it's mostly about body language. It's about movement. So this is the visual aid. I'm not sure if you mean the visual aid, you mean a PowerPoint or visual aid that we were talking about, Najla, if you can specify. Shall we share the story with people we know before our talk to make sure the story is understood? Amazing point. Yes, go for it. If you can share this story with people or friends before, do it and see if it's inspiring and if it's interesting. If it grabs your friend's attention, it's gonna grab people's attention. So this is really important. And please drop me a message, Najla, on the first point so I can um, make sure frameworks to use when structuring my thoughts in storytelling, please. Um, so, Adil, is there any particular frameworks to use when structuring my thoughts in storytelling? Um, so it's basically, first of all, it depends on the context. It depends also on the topics. I see that all of your questions about storytelling, first of all, I think that rather we need to have a session about storytelling. So I'll do my best, Adil, to answer your question regarding framing the structuring the thoughts and storytelling. Um, so I personally believe um, storytelling, it is a matter of you have the story, you tell it as it is, but you make sure that it's connected to what you want the other people to hear, and also to make connected to the context where you are delivering the story. Um, how can I clarify this? For instance, if you are having a meeting about leadership and about storytelling, how storytelling is important on leadership, right? So, how important storytelling in leadership? First of all, if you are doing a presentation about storytelling, you have to tell a story. That's for sure. So, you have to come up or you have to remember um, a story where a leader, through their storytelling, they or a person through their storytelling, they become great leaders. So this is basically how the storytelling should be structured. So you have to understand why you're telling the story. You have to understand how relevant the story is to the topic that you are presenting. And you have to also understand what kind of audience you have. So these are the three main things that you have to bear in mind. But most importantly, you have to understand why you are telling the story and also how relevant this story is in the context where you're delivering the presentation. So these are like the main things that you have to keep in mind. And again, as Najla mentioned, I would highly recommend before delivering the story to, or before even considering the story to be told in a presentation, you can share it or you can tell it to some friends. You can share it with your wife, your husband, your partner, and see if it grabs their attention. And also you can ask them how did this story inspire them, and that way you would understand whether or not this actually story is relevant to the context of which or on which you are going to use afterward. I hope that I answered your question, Adil. I am, yeah, I think that I would be in favor of organizing a storytelling um, session. Probably not now, probably when we do it in person in Tunisia. And yeah, we can address all this, and yeah, we can discuss further the frameworks of structuring thoughts during storytelling. Um, and I'm Basim Rabi, technical trainer. I hope to meet you all SAP. Hello, can you please send me the slides? Okay, everything was clear. Thank you for your presentation. Lamia, thank you. Can you share the slides? Okay, in presentations, for instance. Yeah, in presentation, for instance, in terms of storytelling, Najla, let me see your question, the other questions with you that you asked. Should the story be real all the time, or can we make up ones that fit our goals? So basically, Najla asked, should the stories be real all the time, or can we make up ones that fit our goals? I never made up a story, to be honest. I highly recommend not to make up story, because when you tell a true story, the charisma, the enthusiasm, and the engagement with which you deliver the story might be different from one that you would make up. Story, it's not just about delivering the story. So it's about, let me take one step back, visuals as well. Visuals, it's also like the body language, the movement, and AKA enthusiasm, engagement, charisma. So this is the important thing. I am afraid if you make up a story, there will be no enthusiasm, no engagement. So if I'm telling a story, for example, about myself, how I did, like a good job in something and what I went through, I know the story. I went through this. So the enthusiasm, the engagement, it will be different, right? But if I make up a story, probably it wouldn't be the same. So I cannot advocate for making up a story, but I would push that you prioritize telling a true story. So this is the important thing. Going back to, this is for Najla, going back to Durra, in presentations, for instance, yes, Durra, it's in presentation, for instance. And again, I think that it doesn't matter what's your slides. If you see all the slides that I shared, I could have shared a lot of stories about each slide. I could have shared stories about visuals. I could have shared stories about like how storytelling is important in communication. Every single slide and every single presentation you make, there is probably a story that you can share. But also you need to check your portfolio of stories. What I mean portfolio of stories, because like sometimes there are some slides that you do not have stories to share. But sometimes you can have slides and you have context where you can share stories, right? So I would say go for it. And yes, do it. If you are having a presentation and you're delivering a presentation to students, I don't know what the presentation is about, but whenever you have a story, please share it. Make sure that you are enthusiastic, you are engaged, and in the meantime, you're telling the story, try to assess the reaction of the attendees, because based on the reactions, you can also see whether or not the story is relevant and you are grabbing the attention of the attendees. Najla, again, by visual aids, I mean pictures that help in understanding the story, especially if I'm not sure they are familiar with the vocabulary. No, do not use visual aids. I'm not sure if I answered this or not, but like thinking about it right now, no, do not use visual aids, because if you use a visual aid and listen to this carefully, it seems that your storytelling is not spontaneous. I want your storytelling to be spontaneous. What I mean by I want a storytelling to be spontaneous, I do not want audience to think that you are already preparing a story. I want the audience to think, and this is a trick that you have the green light to use. I want your audience to think that out of nowhere you're coming up with a story that you're telling. Because if you are going to share visual aids, it seems that you are already preparing your story, which is, I'm not going to say it's a firmly no, it's okay, but it is better impacted if you tell a story that, like, that it seems you thought about it right away. It's okay to come prepared, but also for me, I believe that using a visual aid, it's impactful, and this is basically what I've seen, and this is I experienced with many trainers, but also trainees, is that when you tell a story, it's better if it's not pre-ready. This is way better. But also I've seen, I'm not gonna say that I didn't see other people that used visuals, right? So for example, if there is in some when so basically when sorry guys, I need to mute someone. So basically, let me give you an example. I attended a leadership seminar, and there is someone who was telling a story about Winston Churchill, which is the Prime Minister of UK during the World War II, and about his leadership styles, right? And when he's telling the story of Churchill, he displayed the picture of Churchill, which is fine, right? And also he displayed a couple of other pictures related to Churchill, right? Which is fine. So these 8 visuals, it can be fine. But again, my preference is that when you're delivering a presentation, you're talking here about communication styles, everything is going fine. And then if you're talking, for example, about body language, you just stop and say, for instance, I heard this story that captured me about someone who was a great communicator through body language. And then you tell a story, right? So I am totally in favor of not using visual aids, but it doesn't mean using visual aids, it's gonna harm your story, right? And this is basically based on my own experience. Yeah, I think that we are 2 minutes beyond the hour, guys. I would like to thank all of you. Thank you for all. Oh, well, then I will need to practice this a lot. Thank you for the insight. Yes, do like practice with your friends, but also take notes of stories. So starting from today, if there is any interesting stories, like take notes. And then like by the end of the day, by the end of the year, probably you will have more than 350 stories that you can share. That's a lot. Thank you guys. It was really interesting to have you. I hope that you enjoyed this session. Yeah, like looking forward to meet you in person, but also looking forward to meet you for the next sessions. And yeah, I'll make sure also like to have a storytelling session next time. Thank you guys. Yes, I will share on social media. Yes, I will share everything. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Hey, Rada.
Hi, Melik. Ça va?
So, guys, we will be talking about Rada,
I'm really
Jillian,
sorry
and
for
I.
missing the meeting
Yeah,
today.
no, it's okay. Guys, Rada, Jillian, and I will be talking about next sessions. So, if you kindly can leave the room, I do not want to kick you out, but I'm happy to do it. but yeah. So let me stop the recording.
Okay.